Chapter 61 Idiot, you are listening at novelfull.audio. No, I was just trying to confirm something strange, Yi Qingxian replied quietly as he reached behind Edmund. In that silent moment, someone put a heavy thing in his hand. Edmund was stunned. He rubbed his eyes, trying to see the thing in Yi Qingxuan's hands more clearly. It looked familiar, like a brick taken from the wall. It was blue-gray with sharp ridges. It fit perfectly in Ye's palm and had substantial weight. In his ear came the youth's voice, I couldn't believe it at first, but... Immediately the thing started moving. It rose from his palm and sliced through the air in a powerful and beautiful arc. It was suddenly grasped in a stone-like hand that dropped from the sky. For a moment, time was at a standstill to everyone. They watched as Yi Qingxian rose, and pushing off from the table, he raised his hand and the brick. He hurled it forward. As it whistled through the air, the ridges of the gray brick and its shadow grew bigger in Edmund's eyes. It grew bigger and bigger, until it took up his entire eye. Boom! There was a muted sound, and then the gray brick was deeply buried in the boy's fat face. It left a perfect rectangular mark. Following it was a force that had been built up and unleashed full power on his face. Under the dazed gazes, Edmund's body moved backwards. He flew past the second row and crashed into the students in the first row. In the silence, Yi Qingxian loosened the uniform's annoying tie and let out a long breath. Quietly, he said in awe, I can't believe the rules don't include punishment for fights. He stood on the table and looked down at the gaping elite boys. There was a strand of red on the gray brick. 2 drops of blood landed on the floor and expensive table. Laying on the broken pieces of the table, Edmund finally started screaming while rolling on the ground. My face, my face. He clutched his flattened nose. His already fat face had swelled with a purple bruise. The tears from the pain would not stop falling either. Kill him. Kill him for me, he yelled at his friends. That B** dared to hit me. He needs to pay. On the side, Baishi looked at Charles, who had returned. That B** had come back from somewhere with a brick, a bottle of alcohol, and 2 door bolts. He had kept another brick for himself, but Yi Qingxian took it. So now he only had half a bottle of brandy. Seeing how Yi Qingxian fought, Charles could not help but whistle. Oh, so you didn't really run away. Baishi patted his shoulder in praise. I was wrong about you. Please, ask the upperclassmen and see when I ever ran away from a fight. Charles shoved a bolt into her hands. Like a ruffian, he proclaimed, you think that the title of the Academy's most attractive boy just fell from the sky. No, I won it through fights. Just watch for my killer move later. He jumped into the messy fight with the door bolt in hand before he even finished talking. He was almost mistaken by Yi Qingxian as a sneak attack and was hit with a backhand brick. Oh crap, Junior, it's me. It's me. Ah, why are you so deadly? The entire classroom was thrown into chaos. Baishi used her short height to her advantage and made successful sneak attacks. But it was a little worse for Yi Qingxian. Other than the first 2 moves, the trained elites easily saw that he did not fight often and was taken down. After Charles thought for a moment, he lay down on the ground and screamed, help. Elites are beating people up. The skinny guy chasing him was confused. He had just been hit by Charles's bottle, but before he could even react, Charles was on the floor. Had he finally become his family's knight and learned the so-called nerve reflect, not having to fear sneak attacks anymore? Where's the justice? Elites are killing people. On the ground, Charles poured red ink onto himself and rolled around. My leg. My leg. I can't feel my leg. Oh God, I'm paralyzed. Save me. I want to die. Hey, idiot, that's your killer move. Baishi suddenly did not have the brainpower to process any of this. She just wanted to cover her face and pretend she did not know him. More and more people were dragged into the messy fight. With more students getting hurt accidentally, this strange conflict grew in size. The commoners were already upset that the elites purposely picked on others today. And the brash elites were not the type to swallow their anger. They rolled up their sleeves and jumped in. No one expected the first lesson on the first day of school to turn into a group fight. "This is an accident, sir. An accident." Gritting his teeth and face ashen, Ben explained to Lancelot in the room above the classroom, "Sir, 2 black sheep were causing trouble. The commoners are always so vulgar. I will lock them up later." Lancelot's expression was still calm as he gazed down at the chaos. He only shook his head. "They are just a group of young people. It's good to have so much energy." But the dissatisfaction in his voice was enough to make Ben want to explode. The first lesson had been planned so carefully to show to the Queen's messenger. But it had been ruined by the principal for no reason, and now this type of thing happened. It was like pouring a bucket of stinging medicine into his eyes. "Amazing, this makes me reminisce my childhood." The administrator whistled, satisfaction all over his face. Group fights are a part of learning too. But then came a sound that changed everything. Someone was communicating with the ether and chanting runes. "This is getting big." Shock flashed past the administrator's eyes. The mess in the classroom was still chaotic. No one noticed that Edmund had climbed up. With difficulty he stood up, supported by the wall. He glared at Xuanhuan's backside with his swollen eyes full of murderous intent. "You'd Ned, street scum." He spat out a broken tooth, his bruised face full of hate. "You angered me first." Opening his mouth, he began chanting a standard note. The obscure voice was like icicles bumping into each other. They overlapped in the air and turned into the crisp shattering of porcelain. The first to react was Charles. He turned around in shock and stared in Edmund's direction. He knew this string of standard notes. The melody was the sign of the School of Modification standard runefrost. Unlike the other schools, even the most basic of modification runes were unbelievably powerful. Extraction was targeted toward metals. If it was placed on a human, it could deplete half of one's body's liquid in an instant. Frost was targeted at temperature, and if modified onto one's limbs, it would turn into assassin's favorite technique. Frozen touch. Just a touch was enough to kill a large area of skin cells. If it reached a vital organ, the consequences were frightening. But the short chant was already over. He did not even have the chance to interrupt it. There seemed to be sunlight on Edmund's hand, radiating coldness, as if he had a thin silk glove on. The designs on the layers of frost were chilling. "Use your next life to repent," he growled and charged toward Xuanhuan, his hand raised toward his face. Xuanhuan turned around and saw Edmund's fierce expression. He suddenly understood something and could not help but laugh. "Idiot." In that last moment, he sighed, "Idiot." Banner, observing coldly from the side, could not help but mutter, "Idiot." Above the classroom, the administrator laughed while clutching his belly. Under everyone's shocked eyes, the frozen touch covered Xuanhuan's face. The entangled frost designs glowed immediately. In the silence, someone yelped, afraid to watch. But Edmund froze. Because the ether suddenly disappeared in that moment. He looked at his hand in shock, not understanding what had happened. He saw that familiar gray brick appear in his vision again. It grew bigger, bigger and bigger, bang. With a wild roundabout, a broken piece of brick flew at Edmund and crashed onto the floor. In the suffocating silence, Xuanhuan tossed the other half of the brick. Shaking his head, he sighed. The entire academy is enveloped with requiem. Other than special practice rooms, not even resonance musicians have the power to make any effect. This is clearly said clearly in the student handbook. Why don't you read it? Kill him. Kill him. Humiliated, Edmund lay on the ground, screaming in a choked voice. Kill him. Why aren't you moving? The Rossi family won't let you get away with this. My brother won't let you get away with this. Yi Qingxian froze. You mean there are more idiots like you? You wanna die? Edmund tried to crawl over and tackle him in anger. Enough. Ben roared outside the door. The chaotic classroom fell silent instantly. Everyone stopped reflexively and turned to see the angry Ben, feeling unsettled. Someone come take Edmund to the doctor's office. Ben looked at the youth on the floor, and commanded a few students to take him away. Looking at the blood on the floor, he glared at Yi Qingxian. Such a young age and already so cruel to your classmate. How did you pass the character test? Chapter 62. You're dead. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Such a young age and already so cruel to your classmate. How did you pass the character test? I don't know. Maybe there was a test, but then it was changed into an observation, Yi Qingxian replied pointedly. Yi Qingxian had been angry ever since he discovered this guy's true nature, and heard his professor explain the tricks they used during the test. There was not any reason for him to have a good attitude now either. Talking back to me. Ben's expression changed. It seems that other than leading group fights, breaking school rules, and beating schoolmates, I should also write you up for disrespecting elders. Bai Shi could not take it anymore. Hey, are you blind? Clearly it was that fatty who started it. I will take away 3 points for vulgar language. Ben glanced at her. What school are you from? School of Revelation. Try telling my teacher there. Without hesitation, Bai Shi put all the blame on Edmund's school. I'm telling you, our school isn't afraid of anything. If you dare to pick on us, my professor will teach you a lesson. Just as Ben was about to burst in anger, Yi Qingxuan's annoyingly calm voice sounded. Professor, I don't know about group fights, but I'm confused why you said I broke school rules. Saying this, he picked up the student handbook stained with Edmund's blood. He pointed out to Ben, there are more than 400 school rules, from the dress code to forbidden drugs. I memorized everything, but I don't know which rule I broke. Ben froze and suddenly wanted to laugh. There were more than 400 school rules, with more than 70,000 words. He memorized it all. It was only the first day of school. Who was he kidding? Ben was about to begin arguing, but when saw the hidden anticipation in the youth's eyes, his voice died. A strange feeling told him that this guy might have really memorized it all. His mouth opened and closed, but he decided not to think into it anymore. Unfazed, he shook his head. You're being irrational. If you didn't hit him, then what happened to Edmund? Professor, Edmund fell by himself, someone pretending to be dead on the ground suddenly said, scaring everyone. Hey, that guy from music theory, you're stepping on my hand, can you move? Yeah, you. When the crowd quickly dispersed, a dusty Charles finally stood up. He smoothed his messy hair and smiled his signature sunlight smile, bright like a flower. I personally saw him fall by himself. If you don't believe me, you can ask around. Right, I saw it too. He fell. Some students who could not stand the injustice whispered. The low murmur spread through the crowd. Hearing the words, Ben's expression was cold enough to turn to ice. If it were any other time, he would throw all of them into the correction center. But there was an esteemed guest behind him, and the situation he wanted to solve quickly was getting even more out of hand. The continuous whispers made him angrier and angrier. Enough. Silence. Gritting his teeth, he stared coldly at Yi Qingxian. You're Abraham's student now. Is this how he taught you to speak to professors? I only know that the gods tell me to be just and fight against injustice. Yi Qingxian twisted his mouth into a safe smile, revealing 8 teeth, no more and no less. Even the strictest worker at the church would not be able to find any flaws. Before Ben's hateful eyes, he transitioned into a priestly state, and made the sign of the holy emblem across his chest. Softly, he chanted, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified, do not be discouraged, for the Lord, your God, will be with you wherever you go." Then he closed his mouth, waiting for Ben to continue reprimanding him. He would then pull the topic closer to religion, where he could use his rich experience to win. He must use this topic. Otherwise, the hundreds of hymns he had memorized would go to waste. Beside him, Baishi was unimpressed. She muttered under her breath, "You told me yesterday that there's no point in winning a word fight." "Junior sister, you don't understand," Charles chuckled. "There's no point, but it also doesn't hurt. Go die. I'm the senior sister." Ben had not felt this horrible in a long time. He wanted to just communicate with Ether and force this student out of the academy, but he also feared the recommendation letter that supported him. Ben did not know how to end this. The continuous attacks had destroyed all his dignity. At this time, a low voice that only he could hear sounded in his ear. "The kids are just fighting. Just let them be." He turned around in shock and saw the calm Lancelot standing apart from the crowd. Lancelot just nodded and looked away. Putting on his hat, he said something to the administrator and turned to leave. "Sir, sir." Ben froze and glared at Yi Qingxian and his friends. "The academy will not allow any more of this foolery." Done speaking, he turned around and tried to catch up. And so the giant fight between commoners and elites, started by two youths, ended temporarily. But without doubt, it had planted the seed for more conflicts. Within the next month, challenges and fights between the musician faction and noble faction never stopped. But that was an issue for later. After Ben left, Yi Qingxian let out a sigh of relief and turned to high-five Charles in celebration. Ignoring Baishi's raised hand, he patted her head, getting a roll of the eye and a kick in return. "Junior, I didn't expect you to be so good in fights. You're a good man." Charles squeezed his shoulder in praise. "After I get old, you can help me fight off the debtors." "Brother, can you just get away?" "I can leave, but Junior, you can't just not care about my livelihood." Charles latched onto him, grabbing his shoulder. "Come, I'll take you two to lunch." "Don't lead us." Yi Qingxian and Baishi exclaimed. "What are you scared of? I know the campus much better than you. Get to the back and shut up. This isn't over yet. Don't get so happy." Just as they were getting ready to leave, an eerie voice sounded from the entrance. When Baishi saw that it was Edmund's sidekick, her face fell. "What, you want to get hit some more?" As she said this, she raised her fists. Though he had just been insulted by Baishi, Bart's expression changed dramatically before calming down. Coldly scoffing, he said, "Don't forget. The academy might not forbid fights, but they also allow the students to learn from each other. In 1 week will be the selections for the prime student of the class. The ether will be allowed in the practice rooms, and if Edmund challenges you, you're dead meat." Ignoring him, Yi Qingxian walked past him, leaving his words behind. "If he can get up, then let him come." Rooted to his spot, the elite student froze, his face turned ugly. Yi Qingxian never even looked at him. In the evening, a carriage pulled by a black stallion stopped in a secluded area of the city. This was the quietest place in the city's second ring. There were large trees on both sides of the road, and no sign of any urban life. As the heavy gate opened slowly, the carriage entered the yard. Before the door, the driver opened the carriage door respectfully. A slightly aged man stepped down. The white-haired housekeeper straightened his tie and came forward to welcome him. Sensing the fatigue in his master's eyes, he did not say anything and ordered servants to tell the kitchen to add a cup of brandy after dinner. "Where is the Mississippi?" All of Lancelot's men entered the hall and walked toward the library. "She hasn't returned from night practice," the housekeeper replied quietly. "Shall we call her back for dinner with you?" "No need. There's no need for dinner either. I have no appetite. Lancelot pushed open the library's door. The housekeeper stayed outside rather than following inside. He felt that his master needed a quiet space, but did not know what had happened that made Lancelot so depressed. Lancelot's footsteps paused before the door. He seemed to be pondering something. After a while he turned around. "Tell Emma to come see me." "Emma." The housekeeper froze, but quickly realized that he had acted out of conduct. Lowering his head, he replied, "Yes, sir." Called forth by the master, the unsettled old servant pushed open the door 5 minutes later. The library was dark, with only one candle lit, illuminating the man on the sofa. He seemed to be asleep, but when Emma entered, he opened his eyes. He pointed at the seat before him, telling her to sit. "Master, do you need anything?" Emma asked after sitting. "Tell me again, Emma." Lancelot leaned back in the sofa, exhausted. "Tell me what happened when you met that kid on the street." Emma froze. "Are you speaking of?" Hesitating, she said the forbidden word, "young master." In the second-floor dorm of the Music Histories building, Charles gazed up at the sky inside. "Junior, why do I suddenly think that you're seriously dead?" "Ha!" Yi Qingxian, reading on the bottom bunk, looked up. "Don't you know that elite's music education is at least 5 years ahead of commoner musicians?" Charles looked at him with exasperation. "They have a bunch of drugs, research literature, and expensive personal tutors. They're usually official apprentices by the time they enter the academy. I've heard that Banner Adrian has already gotten to the rhythm level. If they want to fight with fists, you can beat them with some dirty tricks. But if it's a fight between musicians, what can you do? It's all my fault for not stopping you earlier." Charles sighed, burying his face in his hands. "What are we going to do? Professor will kill me if he finds out." "Is the difference really that big? You make it sound like I'm definitely going to die. Isn't that the case? I'm sure they already know at least 10 runes very well. You've just entered the academy. How many do you know?" Yi Qingxian was stunned. He counted with his fingers and replied seriously, "I think I only know one." Hearing this, Charles almost fell from the bed. "Then you're definitely dead." "Yezi, you're dead, you know. From heaven to hell, no one can save you." Chapter 63 What a Musician Is. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The hot afternoon sun passed through the layers of ivy surrounding the window, shining into the library. Outside the window, a lazy golden dog laid on the porch, sunbathing and sleeping. Beside it, Baishi earnestly combed its fur, then messed it up again as old Phil slept. Inside the library, Charles stood in the corner crying without tears. With a bucket of water in each hand, and a thick analysis of the Samnium culture. Volume 1 on his head, he stood attentively against the wall. "Don't space out. Your posture is wrong." With a rarely seen strictness, Abraham whacked Charles's knees. "What did I tell you? Keep your knees together. Did you not eat? Keep this position for 2 hours. You'll start over if you move." Charles cried, "Junior, come save me." Yi Qingxian sighed and tried again. "Professor, it really isn't his fault. It's all because of me. A junior's mistake is always because of his senior's wrongdoings." Abraham shook his head. "Charles has been like this for a long time. It didn't matter before, but now he should act like a senior. Okay, let's ignore him and start our class." Abraham gestured at the chair before the messy table, and told Yi Qingxian to sit. "I had planned on letting you read some books first and learn about the theories. But it seems that we don't have that much time now." As he spoke, he climbed up the ladder to take an old book from the shelf and placed it on the table. Using his metal hand, he flipped it open. This seemingly ancient library had all types of books scattered about. The air was filled with the scent of ink and paper, but nothing was moldy or damp. Someone had worked hard at dehumidifying the library. Other than the 3 walls filled with heavy books, the ground was also covered with books and teacups. There were notes strewn over the table too. It was obvious that Abraham did not organize often. Then again, anyone would become clumsy if their right hand had been turned to metal. This was Abraham's own office. After Yi Qingxian and Bai Shi entered the school, it became their classroom too. There would at least be enough room if it was organized a bit more. First, let's define what it means to be a musician. Abraham wrote some words with chalk. There were Samnite words, Asgard runes, the previous version of the lingua franca, and some Latin words. In the earliest Samnite language, musician meant conveyor of missions. In the rune language family, it became Vanaheim. In their belief, the world was divided into 9 levels. Asgard was where the gods lived. Vanaheim settled in the Yingling temple, fighting with demons. They would die at night and be reborn in the morning. They were immortal gods to fight for eternity. Vanaheim has many meanings, including God, power, sorcerer and death. They saw musicians as fated to die. One could not defy this fate. It was also a glory that should not be defied. It was worth it to die in battle. In the long-gone Romulus, musician was the same word as messenger because they also had the duty of sending commands. Though musicians were very powerful in their descriptions, they weren't deities and didn't have powers. They referred to musicians as dark dukes. They would be the messenger during a wedding and go between the 2 families for the groom. He would also participate in the torch sacrifice of the families. In the end, he would act as the bride's father and chase her out of the home. He was also the groom's father and accepted the girl. They had the power to break others' familial relationships, but were also responsible for finding homes for those without a family. From the perspective of the society, they weren't very high up. They were more like a government official and were a part of the entire nation. In the lingua franca, the definition of musician is the simplest, but also the most unclear. If you look at its root, it's created from 2 roots. Put together, it means, controller of ether. Abraham paused here, but heard the youth mumbling to himself. Ether is the messenger, bringing the descendants of the rebels back to the originator. The words left Yi Qingxuan's mouth without him realizing. He had suddenly remembered this phrase, but he did not know where he heard it from. It just felt very familiar. Abraham was stunned. He looked at Yi Qingxian, as if he suddenly did not know him. After a long time, he said softly, Yi, your comprehension is higher than I thought. Yes, musician means messenger of the originator. It was undeniable that, in many cultures, there were many types of legends. But in all of these legends, there was something like the originator. Some myths told that the world was first an insignificant dot in the universe. But after who knows how long, the dot exploded, and became the vortex known as the originator. From there came 4 basic elements, which created the world. According to other legends, everything was dark at first. God lived in the originator. He said he wanted light, and so ether came into existence. The Indians believed that the originator was a sea. In the sea was a great tortoise, and on the tortoise were 4 elephants. On the elephants was a disc-shaped world. Musicians were the messengers that the elephant gods chose. But no matter what legend, there was one similarity. The originator was the source of all ether, the core of all mystery, the assembler of all meaning and, the site of all power. Countless musicians through history had searched tirelessly for the originator, hoping to enter it. Apparently, an Indian prince was willing to abandon his own country to become a musician. After traveling for more than 10 years, he meditated under a sycamore tree for 7 days, defeated multiple natural catastrophes, and finally entered the originator. But there were too many legends. Yi Qingxian could make up a few with just his creativity. He had once thought that the world was created from a bowl of noodles. Of course, that had been when he was starving. In this world, the only place that had evidence of deities was in the sacred city. It was a power that was enough to reverse common knowledge, and the world, even death. 7 days after the first pope died, he was reborn under everyone's eyes, and entered heaven. From then on, every pope would inherit the divine power under the witness of the cardinals. They would be pierced through the heart at the coronation ceremony, and be reborn in the halo of the Holy Temple. But these were just things that Yi Qingxian had heard of. He thought that these were probably rumors. But he could not ask the priest about these things. But the originator's significance toward the musicians of the world was undeniable. Both mankind and musicians have kept trying to research the secrets of the originator since the Dark Ages. The 9 levels of musicians were created after countless investigations and inductions. But that was the standard result after clashes and discussions between all of the different schools. Abraham quickly scribbled something on the blackboard. The most important to you right now are the first 3 levels. The so-called 9 levels of musicians included apprentice level, rhythm level, musician level, resonance level, and others. For a student, the first 3 were the most important. After all, most musicians in the world could not move past the first 3 levels. For a musician, the most basic thing was the interaction between mankind and ether. To be able to sense the ether and use it to create a note counted as the first step, the apprentice level. Those who were in that level would learn new notes, and start researching how to sing the right syllables. It was something that everyone had to do because everyone was different. Whether it was the voice, habits, or key, there were slight differences. And so the experiences of others could only be used as a model. The key part could only be achieved through personal trial and error. This was also why Wolf Flute had thought that Yi Qingxian could never become a musician. Adding that to the fact that he could not sense the ether, it would have been impossible for Yi to complete the first level. Even if he made it past somehow, he would be a horrible musician who would accidentally kill himself. If an apprentice was able to learn hymns with multiple notes and perform a piece well, he could enter the next level. It was the step that decided a musician's future, the rhythm level. If the first apprentice level was just accumulation, then the second step required decisions. After using multiple notes, and performing a short piece of music without help, the apprentice would choose a complete piece under the guidance of his professor to research and analyze. But before that, he must make an important decision based on his performance and experience as an apprentice. The result would decide his future path. No one could fully learn everything, so some things must be abandoned. Once an apprentice entered the second level, he would choose the school and specialization he was best at. All 7 schools were enough for one to study for their entire life. To make learning more efficient at the Royal Academy of Music, this choice was put in the first step. The student could not choose the school, instead, the representative from each school chose their students. This process lessened the trouble. After the accumulation of experience in the first level, the students could receive professional guidance immediately after entering the second level. The owner of the clock shop, Sir Hermes, scoffed at this. Choosing your own path after deep research cannot be compared with being chosen for mass production from the beginning. The first creates artists. The latter is just a group of average smiths. It is so crude. It had only been a few moments, but Yi Qingxian could tell that Hermes disliked the Royal Academy of Music. Chapter 64 Equal Temperament. You are listening at novelfull.audio. During the research of the rhythm level, a student no longer had to deal with single runes, but with an entirely new and much more difficult structure, syllables, created by combined notes. The effect was entirely different from single notes. Whether it was from the level of cohesiveness, or its effect, the same amount of separate notes could not even be compared to a measure. A measure was more stable and complete, a step closer to systematization. The ultimate goal of this level was for the student to combine several measures through research and create something whole. At that point, the measures would transform into a complete musical piece with its own life and energy. This marked the start of the third level, the true musician level. One could only move on from being a student to a true musician recognized by the musician union and the sacred city after they reached the musician level. Most musicians were at this level. Before this level, everyone else would only be seen as students or seeds of musicians. Only those that had reached the third level were seen as truly useful because at this level, musicians no longer needed to manipulate ether for rushed live performances. They could store their musical scores into an instrument beforehand, and activate them using their thought. The tight structure of music scores meant that they were extremely independent. Even if they were taken out, they would not scatter quickly. Instead, they could be stored in another medium. Even a simple measure could set it off. The danger of musicians also sharply increased at this level. As long as they had stored the correct music sheet, a musician would be able to fight no matter what. At the musician level, a good instrument could be the reason behind life or death in a battle. This was why the rain artist had been so furious when he discovered that his instrument had been stolen. As for Wolf Flute, all of the music sheets that he used in his battles were stored beforehand. During a battle, each musician's instrument would bear the brunt for them. Otherwise, rain artist's instrument would not have exploded so easily. Thus, a good instrument was like an assassin's sword or a poet's pen, it was a musician's life. But for you, the musician level is still a bit far away. You'll spend a lot of time in the apprentice level. Abraham did not continue, yet Yi Qingxian rubbed his hands excitedly. Professor, when will you teach me the music notes? Yi Qingxian fluttered his lashes in anticipation. Let's start now. Abraham closed the old book in his hands and knocked Yi Qingxuan's head 3 times. Shaking his head, he sighed. Professor, I understand. After pondering, Yi Qingxuan's expression hardened. He stood up and said seriously, I won't disappoint you, wait. Don't go yet, I didn't even say anything yet. Abraham looked at him, stunned. What do you understand? Did I misunderstand? Yi Qingxian sat back down awkwardly. Doesn't closing your book mean that you won't teach me so easily? Hitting me 3 times means that I should come here at midnight to wait quietly. Shaking your head means that this path is difficult and I should prepare myself. Not knowing what to say, Abraham could only stare up at the sky and sigh. You've only been here for 3 days. Why is your imagination wilder than Charles? I just wanted you to stop being so impatient. He paused and scratched his head. Let me finish what I'm saying. Before officially teaching you runes, you must take a vow. A vow. Yi Qingxian was confused. Vow that I don't tell outsiders about our secrets. I understand. Let's go. It's not that simple. Abraham stood up in the silence. Outside the window, the wind quieted down. These are the 3 vows set by the 3 kings. All musicians must follow them, even if it's just in theory. The time-weathered man stood before Yi Qingxian. Gazing down, he reached out a hand and pressed down on the youth's forehead. It has become just a superficial ceremony in many places now, but I hope you can complete it seriously. So, I will treat it seriously as well. Instantly, all light dimmed. The noise and bird calls outside the window disappeared as well. Yi Qingxuan's pupils contracted automatically. All was quiet. In the silence, he seemed to be able to hear his own breathing. The wind entered his lungs, left through his mouth and nose, and reverberated in his body, creating deep vibrations. Abraham stood before the light so that Yi Qingxian could not see his face clearly. In the sound of the breathing, a faint but delicate murmur came from afar. The sound was too vague, almost like a hallucination. It was as if countless souls were watching them from the darkness. Calm your mind, said the hoarse voice. And so Yi Qingxuan's mind calmed. Abraham's hand pressed against his forehead. It was the metal hand, but it was not scary like a sword or dagger. His shadow protected the youth, blocking the eyes in the light, and the souls in the dark. Let us begin. Listen to the voices, he said quietly. Do not let the pioneers pace for too long. I understand. Yi Qingxian closed his eyes. Abraham's hymn began in the silence. It seemed to come from afar, but it reverberated in Yi Qingxuan's ear. There was an undercurrent of metal and stone scraping, as if wind was scraping rusted metal. Formless awe filled the youth's mind. He heard low rumblings like thunder. It was the sound of hundreds of voices chanting in unison. The voices guided his will, forcing him to join them, speaking with Abraham. The silence was shattered. Yi Qingxuan's voice became sharp like a blade, carving the vow in his fate and soul. Obey fate and all life until death. Follow restrictions, as human ability is limited. Revere the ether, only the originator is eternal. When the last chant ended, all that remained was the last echo of the metallic vibrations dissipating in the air. The youth suddenly woke up from the trance. He did not know when he began to sweat. In his extreme fatigue, he heard Abraham murmur, "Revere the ether." "Revere the ether," he replied tiredly with eyes closed. "Rest for a bit," his professor said. "I will teach you the first class for all musicians in 2 hours, equal temperament." 2 hours later, when Yi Qingxian was brought back to reality, he found the library packed. It had already been a tight squeeze with piles of books. Now, not only was Charles still standing in punishment before the table, but she had heard that there was something fun happening and came back from playing outside. Even old Phil came to check it out. "What are we waiting for? Hurry up and start." Charles rubbed his hands in excitement. "Senior, you stepped on my foot," Yi Qingxian said dryly. "Ah, so sorry, ow. Pain, pain, pain." "Old Phil, let go, it was an accident, I'm sorry." The idiot had stepped on old Phil too. "Stop fooling around. We're in class." She slammed her hands on the table. The room became quiet instantly. But the problem was, she was the least serious one. There were still 2 apples in her hand that she stole from somewhere, and she was having a great time munching on them. Yi Qingxian was pushed to the back by 2 excited humans and 1 dog. His chair had been taken over by Shi too. He could only sit on the floor and sigh. "This is my class. What are you guys doing here?" Shi, didn't you say you're just here to play, not learn? And senior, you're almost graduating. Why are you here? You learn something new whenever you review. I'm here to review the basics. Charles pulled out a cluster of bananas from somewhere and started eating. It's so much fun to be in class. Baishi's face was full of excitement. She was here only to watch the show. "Cousin, this is your first time. I have to witness it. It's so meaningful." Old Phil barked. Not knowing how to reply, Yi Qingxian rolled his eyes. Abraham coughed and hit the old book in his hand. "Everyone, quiet down. Class is starting now." He paused. Seeing that everyone had quieted down, he nodded and showed Yi Qingxian and Baishi the booklet in his hand. "This is something that no Western musician can skip when entering the trade. It is the basics created by Mr. Bach, one of the 3 kings. We call it the equal temperament." Oh, I know." Baishi raised her hand excitedly. "It's the same as the pentatonic theory from the East." Maybe." Abraham said, a little embarrassed. "I don't know much about Eastern music theory." "Don't interrupt." Yi Qingxian knocked Baishi's head and sat up straighter. "Professor, please continue." Like Abraham had said, the equal temperament music score held undeniable importance in music history. The book seemed like shallow beginner material, but in the Dark Ages, mankind knew nothing about ether and musical notes. This book's appearance was like a guiding star in the long night, illuminating all of the musicians' futures. As everyone knew, music notes were the most basic tool to communicate with the ether. In a music score, every measure was an elaboration and structure of notes. The first musicians learned how to control ether by deciphering runes. Similarly, the deeper and more accurately they understood the runes, the better they could unleash its power. But in the equal temperament, Bach used 40.8 different music passages to give straightforward elaborations of 40.8 basic music notes. The 40.8 passages were simple, but the explanation of the runes was practically perfect. Going from shallow to deep, they established a music law. By fixing the notion of musicians, the law gave notes a new definition and categorization. At that time, the categorization of runes was revolutionary. Different from the Pythagorean tuning and octave interval, Bach directly created equal temperament. Creating structure in chaos, it established a base of unprecedented size. Some even called it the start of the path to the originator. Before that, all research was like scrambling in darkness. The birth of this musical score was the end of the Dark Ages and the beginning of mankind's golden era, the Renaissance. To a certain extent, Bach's position as the head of the three kings was established because of equal temperament. Chapter 65 First, There Must Be Light. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The so-called runes are the ether's transcriptions of the world's sounds. As Abraham wrote on the blackboard, he stated, in all legends and myths, the beginning of man's history begins the same way, the birth of language. The Asgard people believed that their ancestor Odin hung himself from Yggdrasil, the tree of truth, and sacrificed his own soul. That was how the world received its first language, the runes language. In Sumerian myths, the wise man Prometheus helped mankind steal the secret of the gods, language. Humans became stronger because of this, but Prometheus was thrown into hell, forever drowning in the misery of the gods' fury. It's easy to see that language is the basis of all civilization and the source of all power. Voices and language allow humans to communicate with each other, and for musicians to control the ether. The Church's Bible says that mankind fell from the Garden of Eden because of their sin. They lost their first language and lost all power. But according to the Bible, the first humans spoke with the world's voice. That language sounded like singing and held unimaginable power. Abraham turned toward Yi Qingxian. What does this make you think of? Yi Qingxian froze, and suddenly understood. Musicians. Correct. Abraham nodded, his eyes flashing with light. If my research proves correct, everyone had the power of musicians before mankind fell from the sky and entered the Dark Ages. Devas, she murmured. On the topic of his own research, Abraham started getting excited in front of the blackboard. He was practically dancing, and his usual stiff and quiet demeanor had vanished. I've always been researching the history of musicians, and the ether, and reading historical literature. If I'm successful, maybe I can clear up the mystery of the Dark Ages and return the original nature of musicians. Abraham continued, where do humans come from? Is there still an Eden in the heavens? How did we fall to earth? And, why are there natural catastrophes? Yi Qingxian was already in awe. Beside him, Charles patted his shoulder. The professor always gets excited when he starts talking about his research. Just smile. Here, have a banana. According to my research, the first written words were runes. At the blackboard, Abraham had finally reached the main point. The purpose of all research is to find the original voice of the world and return to the originator by deciphering runes. By that point, she had already put her head down and fallen asleep. Abraham finally snapped back to reality and coughed awkwardly. Let's start with the basic runes for today's first class. Yi Qingxian quickly sat up straighter. The first lesson is on the simplest rune, light. Abraham picked up a piece of chalk and wrote a complex but clear ideograph on the blackboard. Beside it, he wrote 9 syllables. It is the most basic, but also the most widely used rune element. It can be grouped with others for various effects. It is not only the basic rune for the school of choir, but it is also important for the other schools. To my knowledge, there are over 30 uses. Let us start from the most commonly seen effect, light dance. Abraham led the students to read the basic syllables out loud, but Yi Qingxian had a strange feeling. After 15 minutes, his feeling proved true. It was the same when he read his notebook aloud. The syllables were right, and there was nothing wrong with the runes. He understood all of the theories, but for some reason, he just could not do it. In the quiet classroom, a ball of light grew on by Shi's fingertip. The light was the size of a glass marble. It spun on her finger, flashing. According to the theory, this effect could only create a light source with the same intensity as a candle. There was no reason for it to be so blinding, but from her calm expression, she seemed to have mastered it. "Professor, is it like this?" She played with the ball of light, poking it and watching as it flickered. Glancing at the stricken Yi Qingxian beside her, her eyes became mischievous. "Cousin, you look jealous. But don't get sad. It's not that you're a slow learner, but because I'm a genius." Expressionless, Yi Qingxian raised a finger and flicked her forehead. "Oh, Junior, you're pretty fast at learning." Charles took the ball from her fingertip and studied it with curiosity. "This brightness is totally blinding. It's still not as good as what I made, but I guess it passes." Yi Qingxian became even more motionless when he heard this. Charles could transfer a power someone else had made with runes. He started doubting whether he was dreaming or really awake. Ah, this is coherence. High-end musicians use this technique when fighting together in a battle. Charles's face was full of pride. "Are you jealous? There's nothing you can do, even if you are." "Charles." Abraham pointed at the corner of the room without expression. Charles quickly stopped laughing, gave the ball back to the gaping Bai Shi, and went back to the corner with a book on his head. On the other hand, Yi Qingxian was almost banging his head on blackboard in frustration, but he still did not understand. What the heck? He closed his eyes, sensed the ether, and chanted the syllable. The ether came and revolved around his fingertip. They collided with each other and solidified into a non-existent crystal. In the end, a bit of light began brewing, about to expand, but in the next moment, everything lost control and fell apart. So close. It was always so close. Yi Qingxian hung his head over the table in hopelessness and sighed. It was like this every time. Every single time he was close to success, but always lacked a tiny bit in control over the syllable. He had done everything the book said, but he still could not succeed. "How do you do it?" he asked Bai Shi helplessly. "The feeling. It's simple, just go with the feeling." "What does that even mean?" Yi Qingxian did not understand at all. "It means to go with the feeling. It's so simple. You make it sound so simple that I almost believe you. I recited everything like you." "It's different." Abraham shook his head. "No two people on this world have the same exact voice. Even if you can imitate her timbre perfectly, the sound of your heart is different from hers. It's not a good thing to blindly imitate. Not to mention, we sing the same rune differently than in the East and in India." Dovko Abraham continued, "Don't blindly imitate another person's voice. Focus on your spirit. Everyone has their own frequency." He paused and said something familiar to the youth. "The voice is just the surface. What is important is the communication between your will and the ether." Yi Qingxian thought carefully and seemed to understand something, his heart calmed down a little. He thought back to the night when he communicated freely with the ether. Closing his eyes, he sensed the beautiful and wavering light around him. The light known as ether floated randomly in all directions. He could sense as more and more ether joined in the distance, entering the vortex. Like halo. He felt as the ether collided against each other, sparking white hot light, like a sun rising over the dark earth. He was sensing the ether. It was the rune that Bai Shi had cast. I think I slightly understand. Yi Qingxian opened his eyes slowly and gazed at his outstretched finger. He whispered, the theory is complicated, but it's just like a machine, right? Use the correct syllable to communicate and you'll get the correct result. If the result is wrong, then it's because the syllable is different. Even though I can't grasp the vague feeling, at least I understand this. I'll succeed this time. The youth recited the syllable and stared at his fingertip. First, there must be light. Only the youth's murmurs sounded in the silence. A formless strength drew a faint outline. The rune slowly formed in his heart, guiding him to recite the syllable. In the faint sound, a dim ray of light formed from the emptiness, wrapping around his finger. The dim light was like a flickering candle in the wind, about to go out, but struggling to survive. Finally, the weak light finally turned into a ring on the youth's fingertip. The ring wavered, and finally transformed into an uneven ball of light. It was the result of insufficient control over the ether. The ball of light was barely there, as if it would fall apart within a blink of an eye, but Yi Qingxian smiled. There's finally light, he breathed. Charles had run over sometime when Yi Qingxian had been practicing. He blew and the glow dissipated, instantly extinguished. Such a weak light. Charles shook his head. Seeing the unhappiness on Abraham's face, he cried, Professor, don't get angry. I know what the problem is. Abraham sighed. If you know, then say it and act like a senior. Seeing you like this, I'm scared that you'll get beaten up when you walk at night. Ah, Professor, what are you talking about? I'm just above average in looks. Charles laughed and dragged over a chair to sit down. Patting Yi Qingxuan's shoulder, he said, don't be sad. Bai Shi's talent is a lot more powerful than yours. It's totally natural for you to be slower than her. Anyway, you learned a basic rune in half an hour. Even though you've only just learned it, and still haven't gotten to the point of using it, you're still like a genius out there. Sorry, are you complimenting me? I can't tell. Of course. Most students will spend the entire day practicing and not be able to find the feeling, even with the guidance of a teacher, or if put in an ether-immersive environment. Hearing this, Yi Qingxian thought of his 10 days of fruitless effort and could not help but sigh. I understand, I understand. So, do you know what your problem is? It's the feeling. Feeling. That's right. Feeling. Chapter 66 Feeling. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That's right, feeling. Charles put on a serious expression. That's the difference between geniuses and regular people. Why is it that only a few musicians can stand out from the crowd? Why is it that there are more musicians than I can count, but only 3 kings at the top? It's a subconscious reflex that helps you communicate more closely with the ether. What do you have to do while chanting to group together more ether? Will the length of one syllable cause any changes? How can you use fewer syllables than other musicians to create the same effect? These are all things that can't be taught, because a teacher can't give his feelings to his student. The student can only search around with his own feeling. You know, the rune itself is the power created from the communication between you and the ether. Your power comes from the rune sentiment. The deeper the sentiment, the more intense the feeling is. You can only use your instinct to control it. Otherwise, you'll need to spend time adjusting and getting used to it. Geniuses can even skip most syllables and immediately cast a rune. Like this. Charles raised a hand and snapped. Immediately, a soft light appeared at his fingertip. It was not blinding like Bai Shi's, but was rather stable and gentle, with a tinge of blue like moonlight. No matter how he shook or grabbed at it, the beam of light was still gentle as ever, unchanging. Yi Qingxian gaped. After a long time, he sighed in defeat. What if you don't have any feeling? Then you'd just be making blind guesses. You can say that. Charles sighed. But your sense of ether is very clear. You can even say you're at the top. But why do I feel like you're just blind even with your eyes open? Hearing this, Xuanhuan's expression turned bitter. Okay. If I tell you that I was still blind 3 days ago, would you believe it? Are you kidding? Charles pursed his lips, his eyes turned helpless. If that's the case, then that sucks. Most elites start meditation under a teacher's guidance during childhood in order to block out any distracting thoughts, and focus on observing changes in the ether to raise their familiarity of each other. If you've just started sensing it 3 days ago, he trailed off. They've been practicing for more than 10 years. You're far from them. Charles tried to explain, it's like trying to get a pretty girl. That other guy is her childhood lover, but you've just met. How can you compete with that? Are you attractive like me? Charles. Abraham's book landed on Charles's head again. You're getting off topic. Go stand. And so Charles was kicked to the corner again. Actually, your interaction with the ether can be cultivated. Don't listen to Charles, Abraham comforted him. As if he suddenly remembered something, he asked, I remember you said you knew a rune before. I didn't learn it, Xuanhuan said, a little embarrassed. I looked at some notes. I couldn't understand it all, but then I suddenly understood something and I got it. Can you use it now? Xuanhuan thought for a moment and nodded. I can try. This rune came from his odd epiphany. When he had sensed the ether that night, his will broke through the seal on the notebook, and he sensed the information contained in those blurry notes. He had never read any explanation of any melody, but he subconsciously remembered that melody, and recreated the rune without any difficulty. He vaguely understood that maybe the rune had been hidden in that melody. But why did his father do so, and how? He had no clue. And he could not remember anything other than that. He could only remember that he somehow awoke the instrument. As if a god had been helping him, he played the overture of a musical piece. But the entire process had disappeared from his memory. That's why he suspected it was just a hallucination. But if it was a hallucination, why could he still remember the first note? He was a bit nervous as he began the hymn. Under everyone's eyes, he gazed around and decided to put his left hand on old Phil. The dog squirmed and sneezed. The youth's murmuring began. There were 16 short syllables in total. They overlapped in Xuanhuan's throat, sometimes vigorous, sometimes faint. Going to the rhythm of his breathing, they expanded naturally as if he had practiced many times. Like the faint vibrations of an instrument string, the notes left his mouth and scattered into the air, leaving behind a lingering echo. Sweat beaded on Xuanhuan's forehead. In his heart, a strange power drew a new outline. Like neon lights dancing in the night, it wove the outline of a rune. Was this the so-called feeling? The rune's outline had never been so clear before. The rush from his soul pushed him to sing the syllables. Quickly, the ether began to group. The light appeared in the darkness like stars, grouping toward his right hand. He controlled the pauses and pitch of the syllables, guiding the light to the right place. It had only been a few seconds, but it felt like eternity. Silver light flashed from Xuanhuan's hand and then vanished. The library was still silent, but everyone was holding their breath. Xuanhuan's left hand was still on old Phil, but there was an identical dog under his right hand. It had the same golden fur, the same open mouth, the same arrogant eyes. There was even a noodle from lunch on his nose. It looked like it had been made from the same mold. Shocked, old Phil moved over and looked at the dog, which mirrored his actions. They shook their bodies and wagged their tails, but when they turned to the side, their eyes became disappointed. This dog looked identical to old Phil, but there was not any thickness. It was like a copy printed on paper. No matter how similar it looked, it was not a living creature. From the side, Charles poked the golden dog that only existed in a two-dimensional world. A ripple formed from his finger and the image blurred. But after the ripple, the image became clear again. No matter what Charles did, it persisted like the moon's reflection in water. Runed mirror. Charles turned to look at the professor, his eyes confused. Professor, I don't understand. Abraham's expression was stiff. He did not know what to say. Runed mirror was the most complex of the common runes. Even for lessons, it was put at the back of the textbook. They had never seen someone who could jump straight to the end and learn the hardest part, but was still stuck on the first step. The rune's effect is very stable and the hymn was clear. From the rune's perspective, you've already reached the apprentice level. Abraham gazed at Yi Qingxian. How did you do it? I don't know. Yi Qingxian was confused too. Looking down at the reflection of old Phil, he scratched his head. The runes and syllables were in my head. I somehow felt that doing that was the correct thing to do, so I did it. He suddenly reached out and pressed onto old Phil, doing it again. In a flash of light, the mirror reflection of old Phil reappeared. The two mirror images changed continuously, revealing old Phil's upset face. Yi Qingxian stared in awe at the two images. Pressing down, he did it again, calling forth another mirror image. As if he had gone crazy, he cast the rune over and over again. Finally, 7 mirror images shattered at once. Yi Qingxian collapsed to the ground as if his energy had been sapped. Panting heavily, his forehead was covered in sweat, and his face was pale. Hey, Junior, are you crazy? Charles quickly cleared the table and laid Yi on it. He opened his shirt buttons to help him breathe. Then he commanded Bai Shi to boil some salt water. Casting runes requires strength. Mirror is a continuous effect, and you made 7 at once. You're trying to get yourself killed. On the table, Yi Qingxian had fallen into a trance and was covered in sweat. In his daze, he grabbed onto Charles's hand and panted, I know, Charles, I know how to fix the feeling problem. Seeing Abraham and Charles's shocked expressions, Yi Qingxian laughed. Professor, can I borrow some books? Analysis of the Equal Temperament Prologue, Research of Changes in Pronunciation of Basic Runes, Victor's Experiment Record. Changes of Runed Light, 17 Uses of Runed Light, Pattern of Basic Syllables, Introduction to Jord Hymns. Yi Qingxian flipped to the last page of the Equal Temperament and found the books in the references list from Abraham's library. According to the book's chapters and glossary, and other mentioned literature, he created another list of 14 books. Of these, 3 were in Abraham's library. The other 11 books were kept in the school library, but identification cards were needed to enter the library and Yi Qingxian was not allowed to yet, so he could only let it go. 2 hours later, with a giant pile of books in his arms, he got paper, a pen, and Dictionary of the Rune Language from Abraham's library. What are you doing with all these books? Charles was shocked. Can you finish them all? Some are just for reference. Others I'll flip through. Yi Qingxian patted the pile of books up to his waist, his expression a little helpless. Hopefully I won't need to read too much. Oh right, is there anywhere that's quiet so I won't be disturbed? Abraham thought for a moment. The basement. It used to be Charles's workshop, but he owes too much money and can't work for now. People usually don't go there. If you need it, I can give you the key. Thank you so much. Yi Qingxian smiled, took the key, and bent over to pick up the pile of books. Looking back, he said, oh, right. I won't be coming out for 2 days. If there are any public classes, tell Bai Shi to take attendance for me. Bai Shi was still confused. Hey, cousin, what exactly are you doing? Reading. Doing what I do best. With the books in his arms, Yi Qingxian left without looking back. His voice came from the distance, reading is my favorite thing. In the library, Charles and Bai Shi stared at each other. Abraham seemed to understand something and stayed silent. Professor, did he go crazy? Charles asked uncertainly. Maybe, but maybe he found some feeling, right? Abraham let out a rare smile and patted his shoulder. Are your notes still here from when I taught you how to decipher ancient languages and runes? Charles shook his head sadly. I'm not really interested in your research. I don't know where the notes are. Why do you want them? Are you forcing me to learn it again? Everyone has their own strong points. It's good that you have your own ideas, so I won't force you anymore. But please find the notes within the next 2 days. Looking down at the thick pile of handwritten notes on the table, Abraham laughed suddenly. Professor, are you okay? Charles looked at Abraham, his eyes full of concern. Has work been too stressful recently? Is the school board cutting down on our budget again? It's okay, we can quit. Junior is already like this, we can't have you going crazy too. Watch your words. Abraham knocked Charles's head, his expression becoming stern. Go stand. After comforting Bai Shi, Abraham left the library, leaving behind 2 confused students. He sat on a stone stool outside the building under the afternoon sun, humming an unclear tune. He raised his head to look at the specks of light shining through the verdure. Using his metal hand to fill his pipe with tobacco, he lit it with a lighter. Humming and smoking, he laughed quietly. He no longer seemed like a stern and rigid professor, but more like an ignorant farmer who saw that his crops had turned golden and suddenly felt happy. Maybe he was old now. Thinking of this, his smile became both helpless and relieved. The thought that he had a successor made him so happy. Chapter 67 Negotiation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next afternoon in the Westminster Palace, the atmosphere was serious and suffocating. Security kept all of the outsiders away. Usually, this place was full of people. Known as the capital, the senators of the upper and lower house would play the game of politics here. But now, it was silent because a more important discussion was happening in secrecy. It was already the 3rd day of conferences between Anglo and Yunlu City. It was an important event between the 2 nations, but the conference hall was empty. There were no government officials, no judges, and no military personnel participating. At the left of the long table, Yunlu officials clad in long robes clustered around a silent white-haired girl. At the right, other than the secretary for recording the meeting and the necessary representatives, there were only 2 men leading the talks. One of them sat in the chair casually. His eyes were not open fully, as if he had just been dragged out of bed. Not only was his white beard messy, but a button on his sleeve had been buttoned incorrectly too. He sat there spacing out, as if he was not listening to the talk at all. The smell of alcohol radiated from him. A few minutes earlier, the man, Maxwell, had even been snoring. Now, his eyes were open, and it was an impressive feat. No one understood why the Queen would give such an important task to him, and the insane guy wearing a white coat beside him. The old man was silent and had not said a word the entire time. As if he had just been let out of the asylum, he stared at the princess with wild and enthusiastic eyes. His hands shook as if he wanted to reach out and strangle the girl. Everyone in Avalon knew that the Royal Institute of Research was right next to Arkham Asylum. Even more ironic was that both places were full of crazy and insane people. If the officials went crazy, they would use up the nation's budget, while the patients would use up all the taxpayers' money. In short, they were nothing good. It was fortunate that Princess Yunlu did not lose her temper as she was faced with these 2 unreliable guys. But sadly, the discussion still had to go on. For international matters, arguing about every inch of land was basic. Arguing over every little pebble was expected. The welcoming ceremony, the state guest house, the royal banquet hall. The attacks have not stopped since you entered the city. Until today, there have already been 6 attacks. Maxwell pounded the table, his old face filled with pain. Terrorist attacks because of your presence have already killed and wounded dozens. Of these, 1 earl was slightly wounded, 2 viscounts were wounded heavily, and 6 barons suffered emotional trauma. Even now, they are bedridden and suffer from insomnia. They were all talents who were the pillars of our nation's future. But now they are useless things who hide under their servants' skirts. Is there nothing that Yunlu City has to say? Ridiculous. Without waiting for the girl to speak, the official beside her laughed coldly. We traveled to Anglo as ambassadors. Shouldn't it be your duty to ensure the safety of the ambassadors? And if the princess had been hurt, it would be even more embarrassing for you, would it not? Of course, but... Maxwell arched an eyebrow and laughed softly. If the reason lies with Yunlu City itself, then it's a different matter. My apologies, but please explain. According to our research, the assassins should be related to Yunlu's exiled regime, correct? Maxwell threw a pile of resources onto the table. They've entered Avalon and caused chaos. According to others, they're even performing human trafficking. The police are in a terrible situation. Maxwell continued, according to our research, their leader is an Easterner named Yunlu Qingxi. He calls himself the true leader of Yunlu, and announced that he is just trying to find justice. What does Yunlu City have to say in regard to this? Absurd, the main official scoffed. There is only one leader of Yunlu City and that is the princess's father, His Majesty, Yunlu Qingshu. How is there an exiled regime? We hope that the royalty of Anglo won't be fooled by some hooligans. Really? Then maybe we have a misunderstanding. Maxwell nodded as his eyes turned cold. As everyone knows, Her Highness's father, Yunlu Qingshu, is not the legitimate heir of the Yunlu title. He has always been criticized. As the leader, the ruler of the Eastern Aurora Empire has failed to recognize Yunlu Qingshu's rule over Yunlu City. This has resulted in Yunlu's endless chaos. Maxwell's eyes were heavy with pain, he shook his head and sighed. If Yunlu City wants to leave the Eastern camp, despite being riddled with inner chaos, make alliances with Western nations and become independent. Even Her Highness, the Queen, will find it difficult to support Yunlu. If that is Anglo's opinion, then what is the point of this conference? The silent girl sitting primly in the middle finally looked up. As if sensing something interesting, she took in Maxwell's appearance. Her tone was gentle, but her soft voice somehow stopped the commotion. The white-haired girl said quietly, "My father once taught me that there are all sorts of lessons in life, but in the end, it is all about 2 things. Accepting and rejecting." She continued, "Nothing in the world is full of benefits, with no consequences to worry about. And even if we did give you the technology for creating the bloodline of the dragon, would Anglo dare to accept it? Really?" The crazed man in the white cloak beside Maxwell suddenly burst out in joy. "Accept it? Why not?" Maxwell rolled his eyes and kicked him. "Newton, don't forget that you're here just as an observer and have no right to speak. We do not need to support technology now." Newton pursed his lips and sat back down. "According to Yunlu City's terms, you will exchange the purification technology of the bloodline of the dragon for Anglo's support of Yunlu City's independence. This is beneficial for both parties. After all, Yunlu City is alone overseas and the tribute relationship with the East only survives in theory." Maxwell spoke again, but this time, he spoke in fluent Aurorian Mandarin. His accent was native and flawless. "But there is still something I don't understand." He paused, gazing at the girl's neutral expression. "The purification technology of the East is a byproduct created during the research for the bloodline of the dragon. No, it is more accurate to say that the medium for this technology is dragon blood. If you are to give us this technology, you are essentially giving us a deva with the bloodline of the dragon. Or to put it more bluntly, the only one from Yunlu City who qualifies is Your Highness. Even the king's blood is not pure enough. Is it as the rumors say, that you are planning on marrying our prince?" That is not impossible, the girl replied softly. If there is marriage, the relationship between our two nations would be more stable. Yes. Good. Newton became excited. And if your highness is interested, you can come visit the research institute. I'll sweep that thing to welcome you. I told you to shut up, Newton. Maxwell glared at him and he quieted down. But Maxwell's head started to hurt. This princess was not as simple as she seemed. Whether someone placed obvious pressure on her, or said a sly insult, neither had any effect on her. He sighed. To be honest, I was dragged back the manor last night and rushed here to represent Anglo and speak with you. For public matters, I'd love it if your highness would marry our nation and form a long-lasting relationship. But privately. Maxwell's eyes filled with sadness. To be honest, your highness may be young, but you are already so beautiful. You may be the most beautiful woman I've seen in my life. But our prince has had many ailments since childhood. Okay, he is an idiot who believes he's a sheep. He isn't good enough for you. He became visibly angry and slammed down on the table. Let's just let things go. Newton asked in panic, Hey, Maxwell. Whose side are you on? Manners, beauty, and justice are the essence of humanity, Maxwell stated. Since beauty equals justice, I stand on the side of justice, of course. And anyway, compared to the lifelong happiness of a girl, this is nothing. Newton was about to burst. The faces of the Yunlu officials darkened. This guy may have just reduced Anglo royalty to nothing, but he was really moving forward by retreating. If they really did just let things be as he said, it would be even more awkward for Yunlu. Aurora Empire, riddled with inner problems for many years, was finally recovering. The emperor had already started turning his attention toward Yunlu city, alone overseas and full of riches. If they did not receive the West's support, Yunlu city would be in a dire situation. The officials stared at each other in silence. The lead ritual official opened his mouth to speak, but saw the white-haired girl lower her hand. His expression tightened, but he sat down without saying anything. The princess's voice shattered the silence. Mr. Maxwell, you've worried too much. Compared to the nation, my sacrifices are nothing. And furthermore, if our talk ended just like this, your country would be troubled too, would it not? It's okay. Yunlu is not the only nation with the Eastern purification technique. We can find someone else to ruin. There are so many people in the East, and it shouldn't be a problem to find the right one. But King Yunlu might have to find another country to support his vision of an independent nation. You may have misunderstood. Eastern nations are not very open to outsiders, and the 9 families of the dragon bloodline fight constantly with each other. They don't even follow the orders of the emperor. Anglo, which is so far away from them, will find it hard to offer something that will move them, the girl said lightly. And furthermore, other than Yunlu city, which often interacts with the West, who else would be willing to risk offending the heavens and use the blood of their ancestors to exchange with barbarians? Oh. Maxwell laughed. Does Yunlu not fear the wrath of the heavens and ancestors? Behind the long table, the Yunlu officials' faces turned stormy, no longer able to hide their anger. Indeed, using the blood of ancestors to exchange with barbarians would be a big humiliation if others discovered, but Yunlu had prepared to be criticized by all. But now, the first to mock them was not one of the other families of the dragon bloodline, but their supposed ally. How humiliating was that? The light tone pierced their skin like needles. Their faces reddened, eyes full of fury. But as they glared in silence, the girl's cool voice sounded. Everyone, please calm down. What Mr. Maxwell said isn't without reason. Just like that, the white-haired girl confirmed everything Maxwell had said. If the others hear of this, Yunlu city will be mocked by everyone. If the ancestors are angered and wish to punish us, it will be our own fault. Unexpectedly she said, but what of it? In the deathly silence, everyone gaped at the girl. Maxwell raised his head in shock. Looking at the girl, he seemed to see something and the kind smile on his face slowly froze. As if a fire had been ignited in her heart, the girl finally looked up. There seemed to be a blazing light in those cool eyes, forcing others to look away. Subconsciously, Maxwell stood up, the mockery in his eyes gone. He said, I cannot understand the princess's words. This is something my father told me before I departed. Now, I am only the messenger. Lightly, the girl said, the 100 years of a lifetime is like a white stallion galloping. The glory of morning dies away quickly. If one wishes to be accomplished, one cannot follow all of the rules. If one dreams of the world, one must be revolutionary, and have no limits. A man's words are insufficient to be pitied, the ancestors are insufficient to be law, and the changes of the world are insufficient to be feared. After a long time, the talk finally came to an end. Maxwell remained in his seat, watching as the girl's backside grew distant. He smoked a cigarette, his eyes full of fatigue. Hey, Maxwell. Newton glanced at him, seeing how he was deep in thought. What's wrong? Nothing, just a little scared. Maxwell thought of the girl's eyes and sighed. The ancestors are insufficient to be law, the changes of the world are insufficient to be feared, and a man's words are insufficient to be pitied. She stepped on ancestors, principles, and ethics so easily. How wildly ambitious must you be to make such things sound logical? I don't think I can handle someone like this. All these years, you've handled royalty, the Congress, those elites, and even the budget. But now you're worried you can't handle a little girl. Newton snorted. Have you gotten old? To be honest, I'm still not sure who I'm negotiating with. Maxwell scratched his head. Were those her words? Or Yunlu Qingshu? I feel like I'm not talking to her, but an evil and greedy soul. All these years, people said that Yunlu Qingshu had a good daughter. Now I understand that he had never seen her as a daughter, but a weapon and tool. He sighed. What a pity. What is there to pity? That's why you lunatics don't understand the beauties in life. Maxwell sighed, shaking his head. You stared at her for the entire afternoon, but could only imagine her tied to your surgery table like a white rat. Is there something wrong with your brain? Maxwell was infuriated. Newton, she's a girl. She's only 16. Did you look at her eyes closely? They are pure black, like black pearls, shining with a lonely light. So beautiful, anyone would like her. Such a good girl should be living without worries in a garden, or in a fairy tale like a lotus. But someone turned her into a tool and is willing to have her marry an idiot in 3 years to complete his vision. What a damn pity. Putting out his cigarette, he turned to leave. Chapter 68 Result You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was already the 4th day of school. At noon, the bored by she lay on the library's sofa, yawning. When she felt bored, she would roll over and say, "Ah, I'm so bored." Before the blackboard, Charles sighed awkwardly. "Sister, don't be like this. I'm trying to teach you. I don't want to learn. We agreed that I just have to enroll, and don't have to learn." The little girl rolled her eyes. "I don't care. I want to go shopping. I want to play." "No, wait." Charles waved helplessly. "Look, the professor told me before he left to take his place. You don't want to learn, but it's okay if you want me to teach you something else. We're both experts on music theory. I charge a couple $100 per hour when I tutor. Can't you give me some respect? In my old home, you wouldn't be qualified to be my teacher if you weren't at least an Imperial 9 musician. And I had everything you're teaching memorized by the time I was 13 years old. 13. Wait, that can't be right." Charles froze, getting confused. "Sister, how old are you?" Don't you know that you can't go around asking a girl's age? Bai Shi huffed. Eyes filling with resentment, she muttered, I hit puberty late. I'll grow tall someday, even taller than the White Lotus. Charles had good ears and heard what she had quietly muttered. White Lotus. Who? Why do you care? Anyway, it's the pure little girl that you men all like. Pitiful and makes parents like her, has big boobs, and can make you have dirty thoughts just by wearing a white dress. That kind. How is that possible? A pretty girl like that I haven't met before. Charles was suddenly infuriated. Don't let those girls ruin Junior. Let them come to me, and I'll teach them. Bai Shi glanced at him and quickly looked away disinterested. Senior, you're so weak. Even if there were 10 of you, you'd still get played. No way. I'm the famous prodigy of the Royal Academy of Music. Charles's expression was serious, but his words obviously had no substance, and Bai Shi burst into laughter. Charles's expression turned helpless. He sighed, shaking his head. Ugh, I was brave before, but a coward now. Whatever. If you want to go walk around, wait for Junior to come out and we can go play together. Who knows when he'll come out? Bai Shi suddenly became upset. I called him for a long time last night and he ignored me. What is he even doing down there by himself? Can you learn the notes just by locking yourself up? I doubt it. That feeling isn't that easy to get. Is it really that hard? Didn't I learn it easily? That's what you think. Charles could not help but sigh. Here's an example. Notes are just like pretty girls. They are cold and beautiful, and their personalities and moods are always changing. You need to have the charisma of a wanderer, the inheritance of royalty, the stubbornness of a fool, and the enthusiasm of a lunatic to be able to achieve resonance. But sadly, in the eyes of the notes, Junior is just plain, poor, and has a weird personality. He probably can't even get onto the waiting list for reincarnation. There's no way he can achieve resonance. Is it that bad? It's worse than bad. Charles shook his head. If it were, say, a pretty girl, it'd be easier. At least there are other ways. What ways? Bai Shi asked. Charles smiled crudely. Use force. Go die. A book whacked Charles in the face, knocking him straight to the ground. Charles crawled up and sighed. But before he could say anything, loud barking came from the hall. Old Phil. Charles looked over in suspicious, but finally realized, I know, it must be Spring. Spring your *SS. Bai Shi jumped down from the sofa and ran out without even putting on her shoes. As an evil dog, Old Phil always followed the rule, silence is golden, and never barked no matter what. If the problem could be solved with teeth and claws, then he would use his teeth and claws to solve it. Problems that could not be solved with teeth and claws, well, he never ran into them. Old Phil was too powerful, and never ran into those problems. If there was nothing, Old Phil would never bark. That was why Bai Shi started to worry. What happened to Old Phil? Had he brought back something weird again? On the second day of school, there had been a mysterious theft in the academy. All of the doorknobs on the School of Revelation's first floor were stolen. Who knew what the thief was thinking, stealing only the doorknobs and nothing else? The academy could only conclude that it was some student's prank. Only Bai Shi knew that when Charles found all of the doorknobs in his bed, he almost peed his pants. After giving its welcome gift to his new servant, Old Phil turned and walked away without letting anyone know his name, as a hero should. So Charles and Bai Shi could only dig a ditch in the middle of the night and bury the doorknobs. Bai Shi walked down the hall with the same worry that Yi Qingxian once had. And just as Yi Qingxian had, she froze. Bai Shi stared blankly at Old Phil, who was panting, and at the thing that he had dragged from the basement and down the hall. Her expression twisted. What the heck, cousin? Hey, cousin, the bedraggled youth on the ground said weakly. There was a trembling smile on his pale face. Do you have food? Charles and Baishi sat in the big hall of the small building, carefully watching the youth stuffing his face at the table. Their expressions were unreadable. I went down to the basement to check. This guy hadn't moved at all for the past 3 days. The horrors he had seen flashed before his eyes. Nothing that had been covered by dust had been moved in a long time, but the bottle of ink on the table had been used up. There was a sign of struggle by the door. I guess he was too weak to open the door and had to be dragged out by old Phil, said Charles. Baishi's mouth twisted. Was he trying to kill himself? The draft paper had been used up too. I found these on the table. Charles gave Baishi a thick stack of paper filled with words. Baishi took 2 glances and felt dizzy. The stack of paper, at least 1 finger's width thick, was filled with cramped handwriting in some confusing math symbols. Only some of the words were from the lingua franca, most were from other languages, all jumbled together. What is this? Baishi asked. Some are the runes of the Asgard language, some are Latin used by the church. It looks like he was trying to organize something. Charles tapped the papers. Seems like these days hadn't gone to waste. It's hard work to organize all this. This has nothing to do with notes. The little girl rolled her eyes. At the table, Yi Qingxian was finally done shoveling food into his mouth and licked his fingers with satisfaction. He could not help but say in awe, I never thought that pizza left out overnight could taste this good. It's not just overnight. Charles slapped his knee. That pizza's been there for 3 days. Senior, I just finished eating. Can you not ruin the mood? Yi Qingxian said. Baishi pursed her lips and threw the papers onto the table. You spent 3 days just to do this stuff. Oh, that's useless. Yi Qingxian glanced over and waved casually. Toss it. Toss it. Baishi's face grew pale in disbelief. Yeah, I've memorized it all anyway. Yi Qingxian cracked his stiff neck, making popping sounds. I just wrote it down as a habit, but I realized after I organized everything that it's pretty easy to memorize, so it's useless now. Baishi was so angry she could not speak. What about the music notes? The notes. She pounded on the table, shaking in rage. Didn't you say that you found the way to learn the notes? Don't tell me you spent 3 days writing a book for fun. Ah, cousin, you think too highly of me. Yi Qingxian scratched his face coyly. Writing is such a high-class thing, I can't do it yet. Baishi did not reply and just cracked her knuckles in silence. She looked up and down his body, trying to decide where she should hit first. This guy locked himself in the basement and did nothing. She had been waiting and anticipating for nothing. She had even been a bit worried. Don't hit me yet. Seeing her eyes, Yi Qingxian immediately raised his hands to surrender. I have results. Then show me. Baishi slammed a fist on the table, her eyes flashing. But let me say this first, if you take out another weird thing, just wait to be riddled with holes. I'll have red blades go in and come out white. Sister, it's actually the opposite way, Charles reminded her quietly. The white blade goes in and comes out red. Ow! Charles cried out in pain as Baishi cut him off and stomped on his foot. But amidst the painful cry, one could hear the youth's murmurs. The notes that floated out of his throat had Charles raising his head in shock. In the sudden silence, the bedraggled youth raised a single finger, his eyes shining with the light of the ether. As his mouth opened and closed, both crisp and heavy syllables overlapped in his throat, turning into a faint voice. As if someone thrummed a non-existent instrument string, the weak sound with a metallic feeling filled the room. It was no longer jerky and choppy. This time, the syllables flowed out like running water. Clear runes appeared from the light and transformed into the blazing sun, moving with his heart and soul. In his senses, the sleeping ether had finally been awoken under the bright light. The pieces of light combined from all directions, grouping on the youth's fingertip, and transformed into a substantial light. The light on the fingertip was being threaded together, wrapping together, and finally forming a tiny ring of light. This was the runed light. Chapter 69. He really used force. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bai Shi stared at the ring of light on Yi Qingxuan's fingertip. Through the ring, she could see the youth's black eyes. There was a faint smile in those eyes. It worked. Charles murmured. You used 3 days to make a ring. Bai Shi stuck a finger through the light and the ring shattered, breaking from the outside force. But when she pulled her finger back, the deformed shape bounced back like tallow, turning into a ring again. It was bright as before. Charles nodded. The shape is a little weird, but it's very stable. It must have taken a lot of hard work to reach this level. Properly saying, the syllables should have created a smooth ring equal on all sides, but at least Yi Qingxian was able to improve the quality of the ether structure, and it was no longer a mess like it had been before. It's okay. You've worked hard to do this. Bai Shi sighed. Remember to let us know before you lock yourself up. No one knew anything. Others might have thought you went to rob the church's bank. Don't be so impatient. Yi Qingxian slowly raised his finger. This is just the beginning. Saying that, he blew. Along his breath, a weak breeze went through the ring and ran into an invisible wall, turning back. The breeze seemed to have blew away the dust, revealing its true nature. There was a thin membrane pulled taut across the ring. It seemed like it would tear with the slightest touch. But as Yi Qingxian blew, it slowly inflated. As if blowing a giant soap bubble, Yi Qingxian carefully and patiently increased the strength of his breath. A bubble slowly appeared from the ring of light on his fingertip. Finally, with a slight push, a perfect bubble popped out from the ring and floated up toward the ceiling. Bai Shi watched, frozen. The breeze blew in from the window, and the delicate bubble slowly floated toward the girl. It reflected the sunlight and surrounding colors. The semi-transparent bubble emanated a magnificent glow, as if it were reflecting the image of another world. Bai Shi could see Yi Qingxuan's face through the thin membrane. As if sensing the shock in her eyes, the youth smiled. What is this? Bai Shi carefully reached out to hold it, but was scared she would accidentally pop it. When the bubble floated over, she retreated, afraid she would ruin that beautiful thing. Charles reached out. The lightest touch caused ripples. It floated an inch above his finger, rotating lazily. This was another coherence technique, and it had been executed was amazingly. Charles studied the bubble on his fingertip. Seeing something unexpected, his eyes lit up with a pleasant surprise. This is a variant of the runed light. It's the School of Illusion's favorite effect, bubble. You're already able to use it in battle. If you can make this, then you should know the other 20.3 uses of light, correct? The others are pretty easy, but I had to try this many times. Yi Qingxian rubbed his belly and sighed. I had wanted to make old Phil's shape, but the precision it needed was too high. Halfway through, I ran out of energy and almost died. That was so scary. You learned the note and all 20.3 uses over 3 days. But 3 days ago, you had no interaction with the ether at all. How did you do it? A stupid method that everyone can think of. Yi Qingxian pointed at the papers on the table and chuckled. Practice. In the end, a musician controls the ether by chanting. The ether joins together and creates the structure of the rune. Different runes have different effects. The principle behind it is complex, but since the proper syllable can achieve the proper result, I just needed to pronounce the correct syllable, Yi Qingxian said. As you all saw, I don't have the genius so-called feeling. So when I chant, I can't tweak the syllables according to the outside environment and the ether's reaction, so that's why the result was weak, right? That's right, Charles nodded. How did you fix it? It was easy. Yi Qingxian snapped his fingers. As long as I can anticipate outside disturbances beforehand, then there's no problem. In the silence, the youth spread out the papers with a smile and gazed at the scrawled handwriting. All I did was find the proper syllable from different records. The theories used now, and corrections to pronunciation all come from each individual's sense of the originator. Then they adjust their sound of heart and perform the rune. But it was noted in 10 Basic Problems in Casting, there's a non-mainstream school of behavior. They don't believe in the existence of a soul, and only believe in action and reaction. It can be applied to phantom beasts, which are created from ether. So there should be a set mechanism to force a reaction from the ether too. There was a long silence following Yi Qingxuan's words. After a long time, Charles processed Yi Qingxuan's words with difficulty. So you're saying that you read everything that had anything to do with light, chant records, the ether environment at the time, the timbre, frequency, pitch, pattern of change, and everything else. That's right, Yi Qingxian nodded. Everything. Charles felt like he was hallucinating. Everything. Yi Qingxian nodded again. His voice trembling, Charles asked, that's what you did for 3 days. Yi Qingxian thought for a moment and shook his head. It took 1 day to organize all the material, and half a day to find the pattern of change of notes. Memorizing it all took the shortest amount of time. He paused and added, there's not much, give or take 600 variations. If you take out the 200 or so rare circumstances, it's easy to remember the rest. The changes are complicated, but once you get the pattern, it's not hard. Silent, Charles looked at the youth, his eyes wild like he was looking at 2 different things. His left eye was looking at an idiot, while his right eye was looking at a strange creature. I can't believe it. Your *SS really used force on the runes. Yi Qingxian smiled. If using force works, then I don't mind. Charles looked up to the sky inside. Other people use their experience and look for shortcuts when trying to pass a mountain. I can't believe I met a lunatic who would try to flatten the mountain. The Royal Academy of Music has more than 10 majors. Most are more specific divisions of the 4 major schools. This includes our school, music history. It is considered a branch under the School of Revelation. But because the material we cover overlaps too much with other majors, and all of the professors left, the major was basically eliminated. Abraham sighed with a sense of loss. When I first came to the academy, the principal saw that I wasn't good at anything else and put me in charge of this major. There'd never been many students. There've only been you 2 in these recent years. Here, his expression became bitter. I'm not the best at teaching and no one is interested in research-oriented studies, so it has never been popular. It probably won't even exist in a few years. Professor, don't worry. You have a genius like me. Charles comforted him. Wait for me to take care of my problems at hand, and then it'll be our time to shine. Don't be ridiculous. A major is a serious branch of study that needs the blood and sweat of many people. It's not just you getting attention. Abraham knocked on Charles's head and returned to teaching Yi Qingxian. Do you have any thoughts? Basic criteria of ancient writing, exploration of the sources, and changes of major language branches, the history of the Dark Ages. Confusion was written all over Yi Qingxuan's face. Why do we have to learn this stuff? These are our professional courses, my friend, Charles drawled. Music history's strong points are deciphering ancient literature, music scores, and runes. They produce scholars and archaeologists. So we can't fight? Yi Qingxian asked. Charles patted his shoulder. It's okay, Junior. We're different from the hooligans from the School of Modification. At least scholars don't have to go to war, right? Other than our professional courses, the classes aren't much different from the other majors. And we have our own field in music scores too, Abraham said. There are similarities between the ancient language and runes. You're talented in deciphering runes and analyzing data. This major suits you. Xuanhuan was still somewhat confused. Professor, you saying this makes me happy, but I still feel that the future is just bleak archaeology. Why don't you look at this? As he spoke, Abraham placed a notebook before the youth. These are Charles's notes from when he first started. I think you'll find something you like in it. Ha! Xuanhuan opened the notebook, flipped through a few pages and froze. It was clearly Charles's notes, filled with explanations of ancient languages found from archaeology digs. Xuanhuan had never seen these things before, but it felt familiar for some reason. When he read the reasoning portion, a streak of light flashed past through his mind. This book of theories and patterns used when deciphering ancient writing was identical to what he had been doing when looking for the changes in runes and syllables. In fact, the structure and direction was far more complete than his. Just by scanning and comparing, he realized that he had made many mistakes down in the basement. It was just theories and did not include any applications, but they seemed to target his weak spots, and goosebumps popped up on his skin. Compared to these notes, the exhaustive method that Xuanhuan had been proud of was like a sieve. If these theories were correct, then he could save at least 70% of his efforts when analyzing the runes and changes in syllables. At least 70%. What is this? Xuanhuan glanced up in shock, seeing Abraham's lips curl into a faint smile. He had never seen such pride in his stiff, wooden teacher. I told you. Music history is the best at deciphering ancient history and literature. Music scores are part of literature. Most of the scores and techniques we know today were found from archaeology sites. No one is better than us at reading music scores and runes. But why have I never seen this in textbooks? Xuanhuan gaped. Ah, this. Abraham suddenly seemed embarrassed. Charles always complained that the textbooks before were too hard, so I created some new methods from my own research. But then this guy wouldn't learn them, and I didn't have a student to teach. Would you? Yes. Yes. The youth practically ran over to hug the professor, his eyes shining. Professor, please teach me. How about we start with the runes? I have some questions about the variations of light. Get down first. Abraham finally pulled the excited Xuanhuan down from his body. I still need to organize the teaching material. How about we start class tomorrow? You still have 5 days. If you're only going to memorize it all, then you still have a big chance to pass. Xuanhuan finally calmed down, but he was still euphoric and would not let go of the notebook. Hee, there's always a road when you get to the mountain. Is that a saying from the East? Abraham lowered his head, sighing. I remember an Eastern professor used to say that. Eastern professor. In an instant, Xuanhuan woke up from his euphoric state. Finally remembering the things that Wolf Flute had told him, his eyes lit up. Who? It was decades ago. You asked me so suddenly that I don't remember. The professor's brows furrowed. Was it decades ago, or just a few years ago? I remember the academy used to have a professor in the school of mind from the East. I think his name. The more he tried to remember, the more confused he became. No, maybe he was Burgundian. Did I remember incorrectly? But why do I feel like I went to his wedding? Here, he shook his head. I really can't remember. Is it because I'm getting old? Xuanhuan stayed silent, not sure what to say. He suddenly realized that everyone had forgotten about his father. Abraham had lost his memories, and if those people in the academy had remembered him, they would have remarked how similar he looked to his father. Even Wolf Flute, who had ditched school, had started to forget what his father had taught. In this academy, everyone's memories of the Eastern musician, Yi Lanzhao, had disappeared. It was like he had never existed in this world. Who did it? Someone else? Or was it, his father himself? Musicians of the school of mind were the best at controlling others' memories. He had surpassed the 7th level of the scepter rank, and he did not even need to make any physical movements to erase everything. But he was able to erase the memories of so many musicians, and even put a seal on Wolf Flute's lecture notes without even so much as a hand gesture. Such skill had surpassed everything. But with skill like this, why would he still join Satan? Since the beginning, Yi Qingxian never believed the crimes that he had supposedly committed, but now, what did this all mean? He sank into contradicting thoughts. No matter what he did, he could not solve this mystery. Chapter 70. The most important thing is to be happy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hey! Yi Qingxian, your thing is everywhere. Just as the youth lowered his head in thought, a roar sounded. He attacked on instinct, but hit empty air. Hee, you want to make a sneak attack on me? You're still too young. As if he had predicted everything, Charles took a step back. Hey, are you awake now? You've been standing under the sun for an hour. She said you're practicing some weird Eastern music called 9 Suns. Have you been enlightened yet? Enlightened my *SS. Yi Qingxian rolled his eyes. What do you want? Didn't I tell you? I didn't go out for 2 days, and I realized that today your thing is everywhere. It's amazing. Everyone knows. Know what? Instinctively, the youth had a bad feeling. Know what? Your amazing reputation, of course. Charles said, his features animated. Practically the whole school knows that there's a mysterious student from the East. He's brave and just, can't stand evil and injustice. The praises make you sound like the representative of chivalry and hope for Anglo's future. They say that on the first day of school, you couldn't stand seeing the elites bully others and stood up in a fury to help. You took on 10 at a time and beat them all up. Then, for the last show of bravado, you argued with evil teacher Ben until he couldn't reply and had his entire worldview changed. He even spat out liters of blood. When Ben and the others heard, they went crazy. Someone said that they're going to make you leave the public lecture on a stretcher in 5 days. Congrats, the elites hate you. Charles exclaimed. What the heck? Hearing all of this, Yi Qingxian was in a daze and wanted to cough up blood. Who spread these rumors? Charles laughed shyly and pointed at himself, me. You *shoal. Charles, don't run. Yi Qingxuan's angry roars bellowed over the Royal Academy of Music at noon. I'm going to kill you. Ah, don't. I just said it for fun, but I didn't know they would all believe me. Charles ran, dodging the bricks and wine bottles thrown at him and explained in panic, I didn't want this to happen. Junior, calm down. Calm down. There's a good side to everything. Good. Yi Qingxian roared. I was just staying home and now I suddenly have a bunch of enemies. How can this be good? There's a good side. Really? Charles put his hands up, pleading. Did you know? Someone found out about your recommendation letter, and now you're a legend in the academy. I didn't even know that you had something to do with the legendary King of Black. You make everything sound weird. Why don't I know about this? Yi Qingxian felt a little guilty about this. He had always thought that someone like Wolf Flute could only come up with a recommendation letter along the lines of, I recommend Yi Qingxian to take your exam. Please accept him. But then he somehow ended up with Bach's signature. After finding out, Yi Qingxian had almost peed his pants. That **starred Wolf Flute had dared to forge a recommendation letter from the most powerful king. Okay, let's not worry about whether this is true or not. You're so popular now, even the Congress knows. Charles praised. When I went to the cafeteria this morning, I said that you're my junior, and I got more meat than everyone else. This is good. It's good, my friend. Without your reputation, where will I get my extra meat? You're still thinking of your meat. Yi Qingxuan's face darkened even more. Stand there and don't move. I'll fix the hole in your brain. Don't worry, everyone in Loot knows that my technique is the best. Ah, Junior, your image will be ruined if people find out. Charles closed his hands, catching the wrench that had been hurled at his head. Feeling the pressure of the wrench, cold sweat beaded on his forehead. Do I still have an image to protect? The youth yelled. Yes, yes. It's a great image. Junior, you're the leader of the commoners, and the heart of downtown. Everyone knows about the brave and little Qingxian. It's like a golden plaque. Charles continued, so many people want you to join their club. I've gotten so many buffet coupons just so I can introduce them to you. Now, you just need to find the chance to make an appearance, and the title of prime student of the class will be yours without a doubt. After chasing this guy for so long, Yi Qingxian was out of breath and had no energy to do anything but roll his eyes. What the F***ck are you joking about? You don't believe me. Charles smiled. Come eat lunch with me at the cafeteria and you'll see. Yi Qingxian still had not figured out just how big the Royal Academy of Music was. It seemed like it only took up a bit of Midtown, but going through the doors was like entering a whole new world. The size was unimaginable. Divided by layers of ancient trees and high walls, the campus was like a maze. If one did not know the roads, taking a few wrong turns would be enough to get lost. Very few people could figure out the exact location of the buildings. Apparently, only the principal's office had the full map of the campus, and that the one on the last page of the student's handbook had been torn out. Apparently, the map of every school was different. Some places that seemed far away could be reached within a few minutes if one knew the path. Others that looked close would somehow disappear once one got close. According to some students' research, the parts used for teaching was only 1/3 of the entire campus. But when they decided to look into the other 2/3, they somehow lost their memories and forgot their plan. There were many cafeterias in the campus too. To reach the closest one, Yi Qingxian only needed to take a right turn and then a left turn after 3 intersections. It was already after lunch hour, so there was barely any crowd. Yi Qingxian followed Charles into the cafeteria and gazed about. Smelling the food made him feel better. He would even forgive Charles for leading him into the ditch. Around them, students sat on the chairs and ate lunch, some talking quietly. Seeing them like that, Yi Qingxian felt relieved. Good. No one had tackled him, and he was not being watched like a strange animal in the zoo. Nothing had happened yet. Everything was normal. He let out a breath. This is nothing. Charles laughed. Why don't you turn around? Yi Qingxian sensed something strange behind him. He looked back and saw that half of the cafeteria was silent. Everyone that they had passed had fallen silent. It was as if Yi Qingxian had stolen their voices. The ones who were laughing and talking with their friends had all shut their mouths. Those who had been eating had put down their bowls. The ones who had been sleeping raised their heads, looking at his backside. Those in line for food sensed something odd. They understood when they turned and saw Yi Qingxuan's white hair. That guy is. Yeah, I heard. The first day of school, I was there. He made Edmund. As everyone was in shock. Charles quickly cut the line and threw 2 lunch coupons into the window, speedily piling food onto the plates, not feeling that anything was wrong. But the stares made Yi Qingxuan's hair stand up. Why are they looking at me like that? He asked quietly. Because you're a good man. Good man my *SS. Not knowing what to say, Yi Qingxian waited until Charles finally filled his plate, and walked toward a quiet corner. Eastern Yi, good luck, someone yelled above the whispers. Don't lose, a girl called out after gathering her courage, then ran away with a red face. In the crowd, a dark-skinned boy had a drumstick in his mouth and waved at him, saying unclearly, "That's right. We support you." Yi Xuanhuan's expression froze on his face. "Don't lose what?" he asked quietly from the corner. "Why do I need good luck?" "Ahaha, well." Charles looked away and replied a bit guiltily, "Probably because someone spread the rumor that you can't stand those elites, and proclaimed that you'll beat up Edmund so badly after Friday's class that even his mom wouldn't be able to recognize him." "What the f***ck?" Yi Qingxian wanted to cough up blood all over this stupid face. "You again. Surprise. Senior, do you want to find my corpse on the streets?" "I said this so that I won't find your corpse on the streets within a week." Charles exclaimed as if he had been greatly wronged. "Wow, it seems that you kind of make sense and are trustworthy, as if." Yi Qingxuan's features twisted. "You've been busy these days, huh? Well, it's not like you can escape the challenge during the public lecture next Friday, right?" the Ned Sr. asked, raising his fork. "If nobody cared about it, do you think you can survive the elite's tricks?" The school board is completely controlled by the elites. All the commoner professors have been replaced, and the principal isn't here either. The school is the elite's territory. Charles continued, "Let me tell you, over these years, a lot of people have disappeared in the Thames River's sewage system. Those elites all grew up in the viper's nest. All of them are heartless. Do you think they'll let you go after getting screwed over by you?" Yi Qingxian was disgusted. They started it. In their eyes, it was the commoners' fault for fighting back. Charles's voice made him freeze. Seeing his helpless expression, Charles patted his shoulder. "Hey, I gave my all to help you make a hit. That's all I can do for you at this point. So you think it's better to die when everyone's watching?" Yi Qingxian could not believe it, and glared at the B** before him. "Why do I feel like you're just here for the show? You're making me sad." Shrugging, Charles pushed a plate of food. "Here. The most important thing in life is to be happy. You're so hungry, and the meatballs will get cold if you don't eat soon. Eat. You're going to kill me someday." Yi Qingxian grabbed his fork, turned his anger into hunger, and attacked the food.